Today, we're going to talk about an incredibly important topic as it relates to criminal justice. And that has to do with how does somebody get out of prison? How can they be released? How does what we call the parole process work? Because it's for those people that unfortunately become victims of crime and the individual becomes incarcerated, it's very important that victims understand what is the process for somebody to potentially be released from prison. It is probably one of the most important roles is to have a deputy district attorney or a prosecutor represent two things at a parole hearing. One, and really this is really the core function of being a DA, is we are there to represent crime victims. When somebody becomes the unfortunate victim of a crime, the prosecutor is supposed to be their voice. And they're supposed to stand up for them. They're supposed to advocate for crime victims. And so the parole process, it's a critical part of the system that we have a prosecutor there to represent and to advocate on behalf of crime victims. The second part of that is that we are there not only to advocate for crime victims, but we're also there to advocate for the public. Because inmates, people that are convicted of violent crimes and that potentially are going to be released from prison, they could be dangerous and they could really jeopardize the public safety of our community. And so, having been in this business a long time now, understanding how it works, it is almost just as important to be there at a sentencing as it is to be there for a parole hearing. Crime victims have a constitutional right under what we call Marsy's Law, and they have a right to be present at parole hearings. They have a right to have a voice. And the penal code really says that the prosecutor is supposed to be the sole representative of the people at a parole hearing. And so it's unfortunate, but there's at least one county in the state that has chosen not to send prosecutors anymore to parole hearings. And that's, as long as I'm the DA of this county, that's never going to happen here because we have an obligation, not just to people like Tammy Johnson and other crime victims, but to our community at large to make sure that they are safe. Are we seeing more people get released from prison? The answer is yes. Over time, we've seen a higher percentage of what we call grants. So when somebody comes up for parole, the parole board, it's called the BPH, the Board of Prison Hearings, hears whether or not somebody is suitable for parole. And there's a number of different factors. There's a number of different ways that people can now get out of prison. It's not just your traditional parole hearings where maybe somebody was convicted of murder and they've served, the minimum amount of time they need to serve. They go in front of a parole board and the board decides, are they suitable? And there's a number of things that they have to look at. Have they been rehabilitated? Are they doing programming? Have they had problems in prison? But over the last, 5 or 6 years, there's been a number of other ways that people can get out of prison earlier than they would otherwise get out. One of which is called the elder parole. And that law was passed a few years ago. And initially when it was passed, it said, hey, if you are in prison for life, but if you get to a certain age, initially it was 60, and you've done a certain amount of time on that prison sentence, then you can get out potentially under what's called elderly parole. That law has now been softened even more so that, and I probably take offense to this because I would probably qualify myself, is that if you're 50 years old and if you're 50 years old in prison and you've done 20 years of your term, you can get out on what we call elderly parole. So when there's people out there telling the public, oh, don't worry, he's never going to get out, he was sentenced to 75 years to life, that's misleading, and quite honestly, it's not true, because people can get out as early as 20 years under elderly parole if you're 50 years old. So that's another way that people can now get out early than they're otherwise sentenced. Probably one of the most more common ways that inmates are getting out is what we call now youthful offender parole. And so over the years, the legislature has passed a number of bills recognizing that when people are young and they commit crime, their brains haven't fully developed. And so should we allow for those individuals, if they've rehabilitated themselves and they've demonstrated they're not dangerous anymore, to allow them, because they were youthful at the time of that crime, should we allow them to be released? And over the years, that law has gone from, if you're under 23, now it's anybody that's under 26 at the time they committed their crime. So probably the largest number of people we're seeing getting out early are people that were convicted of some kind of life crime, what we call a life crime, which is like a 15 to life or 25 to life. And the parole board is granting a parole because they were youthful. Some of them our office may vehemently oppose. Some of them we may not disagree with. I'm one of those people that believes 100% in rehab. I believe in redemption. I believe that there are many people that are going to get out of prison and they have adequately done what they need to do to rehabilitate themselves, to make amends, to serve their time. And then there's other people that, in my opinion, and we're going to talk about Tammy's case, is that they should never leave prison because of the horrific crimes that they've committed. And sometimes it's not just about have they rehabilitated themselves. It's about what was the crime in the first place. And so when you have a serial rapist who's, destroyed the lives of countless number of women, or you have a serial child molester like we're going to talk about today, then some of those folks have earned their sentence, and some of those folks perhaps should not be released or should not be released early at a minimum. What are we seeing in terms of statistics? What are we seeing over the course of time? How much volume are we talking about in terms of these parole hearings? To give you an example of just Sacramento County alone, in 2020, just last year, we had, I think, 290 cases that our office represented the victims, the people at a parole hearing. Overall, what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years is the number of people that are being granted parole has gone up significantly. I think from 2016 to 2020, we've seen a 400% increase in the number of parole hearings being granted. How do we do in Sacramento? Well, the statewide, if you really drill down into the numbers of like how often are people getting out, what's it likely? I mean, back in the day, getting a parole date was probably a much more rare event. Nowadays, the statewide statistic is around 35%. So if you got 100 people going in front of a parole board trying to get out on parole, 35 on average are going to get out or get a date. In our county, we do a pretty good job of, obviously appearing at those hearings, making our position known, and that number is probably a little bit over 30%. So I think it's important not only that we're present, but that we're advocating and we're a voice. And sometimes remember, the victims may not even be present at those hearings. And so sometimes we have to advocate when the victim has no voice in the first place. Keep in mind, people end up in prison for the most part because they've committed violent crimes. And so people that are coming up in front of a parole board are people that are there because of some violence. So it's anything from child molest, forcible sexual assaults, kidnappings, robberies with use of guns, attempted murders. It is every kind of violent crime you can think of. The overwhelming number of types of cases that we are appearing in to represent the people are going to be murders and other types of typically sexual assault crimes like rapes and child molest.
In 1996, my kids told me that they wanted to, come out and have a meeting with me, my older kids. And they all came to the house, and Janae was there, Robert, Jason, Anita, and Johnny, and they told me what Ramel did. And it's beyond devastating to hear something like that. And I really can't even remember what was said because it's like a blur to me. So that's the first time I found out, and I didn't know what to do about it, you know. So I knew the only thing I could do is to call the police on him, you know. And I called the police. They came to the house and they interviewed me and Janae and got all the information. And after that, the boss started going for the case.
I don't want to go into great detail. I just think it's important that people understand that your daughter suffered years of sexual abuse by your brother, her uncle. Very, very significant, went on for a long period of time, involved a lot of threats and violence and a variety of different things that really devastated your daughter. One of the things that is important for folks to understand about the seriousness of this case, Tammy's case, or Janae's case, is that when law enforcement got involved and the case was investigated, it was discovered that Ramel White, Janae's molester, was involved in an organization called NAMBLA, which stands for the North American Man-Boy Love Association. It's a group of, quite frankly, a bunch of perverts who think it's okay for men to have sex with young children. And through the course of our case, we discovered a video that showed that Ramel White was involved in these types of meetings that supported this twisted idea. And when that came to light in the court proceedings, Ramel was out on bail and he fled the country when it was discovered that we had this evidence now, this very, very damning evidence. And as a result of his fleeing, and unfortunately, Tammy's parents helped him with that escape, essentially. The case ended up on a national TV show, trying to help apprehend him. Took a long time. I mean, Tammy and Janae suffered so much just as a result of the crimes, right, Tammy? But then you added all these additional things at the justice system that happened through the course of the justice system. Ultimately, Ramel White was apprehended down at a little town in Mexico, and he was brought back to Sacramento, where he ultimately went to trial, and another prosecutor by the name of Leslie Kolb went to trial. And he was found guilty, and the parents were also found guilty. And Ramel White was sentenced to 242 years in prison. And quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, he earned every minute of that 242-year prison term. And so then you fast forward, and you think, and Tammy can speak for herself, but when a judge sentences somebody to 242 years, you think you're safe. You think you can breathe again. You think your child's voice has been heard. And you think that this child molester, who didn't just molest Tammy's child, but molested other children as well, you think that the community will be safe. And then last summer, we got notified that Ramel White had been granted a youthful offender parole date. Right, Tammy?
Yes.
Probably one of your worst days, right?
Yes, definitely one of my worst days. I couldn't believe it. And I had a feeling that something wasn't right, and I prayed. And after I prayed, I just got back in the bed and just picked up my iPad, and I went to someone's page, and I saw where Ramel's father had said, "Oh, do you know Ramel's got paroled?" And I was in shock because I didn't even know he was up for parole, and I didn't even think that it was possible. So what I did, the first person I thought about was Anne Marie, because she's always been there for us. So I sent her a message, and I just thought, well, when she wakes up, she'll see it. But I didn't think that she would see it that fast, but she was, out of town. So she responded really fast, and I told her, and she was in shock also, and she just said that she's going to be back in town on Monday, and she has a big case going on, and they'll see what's going on. So after that, she told me that
I told her that, in fact, he had been granted a parole date, that we were not aware of it, and that we were going to do everything in our power to make sure that decision was reversed. And honestly, I remember now, because I was basically driving across America on vacation, and I was shocked to hear from Tammy that had happened. And so, fortunately, we put our wheels into motion. And the one thing that's, I guess, good about the law is that we can ask the governor to rescind a parole decision. And we went into, 150% mode. Tin Ho from our office took the lead on it. And we wrote a very, very powerful letter to the governor, basically begging him to reverse it. Because, if you really think about it, this guy who did these horrific things for years, had served less than 10% of a sentence. Less than 10%. And I was like, shocked. I was shocked and disgusted and just heartbroken for Tammy. Tammy had lost Janae, a year or so earlier. It was very sad and devastating to have this secondary trauma again. And, we were very aggressive in trying to get that decision changed because it was just wrong. And fortunately, the governor reversed that decision, which then meant he would go back to another parole hearing, and then he'd have to make his pitch again. And so we did that hearing, about 2 months ago, Tammy? Is that about right?
Yeah, it was like 2 months ago, and it was really devastating to go through because I heard some stuff that I didn't even know. And the whole experience, even to think that he might be able to get out after what he did, and the whole society would really be at risk. It would be so many more victims. The whole society would be just in danger because, like I was saying, he's not repentant. He's an animal to do that in the first place. Mm-hmm. If he gets out, it's going to be so many more victims. And I think since he got caught, not only would it be victims of him being a pedophile, that he would end up killing them so they couldn't talk.
This was 25 years ago for your family, and it is raw for you today. And that's why, in my opinion, it is so important to have a prosecutor with you to walk you through this process, to be there for you, to speak for you, because people don't necessarily understand that the devastation that these people inflict upon families, right? Yes. So I just, I'm just so proud of you and what you've been able to do in terms of speaking up for your daughter, yourself, the community at large, and the public.
We thank you, Anne Marie, because your diligence and your heart, you went way above and beyond, and you are a godsend to my whole family. Wow. And I just want everybody to know how hard you worked. And it's like you're doing this straight from your heart. And we were blessed to have met you because when everything happened, I didn't even know you were basically a baby DA because you were so strong.
Bad hair. With really bad hair.
I thought you were heading everything, both of us did. To go through something like this, it's already devastating that it's your baby that you gave birth to. And then it's a triple devastation that it's your brother. And then another triple one that it's your mother not caring. And when I went, like I said, when we met Anne Marie, she cared and we could tell that she cared. And from the moment we met her, she was, you know, she was on it. And I can't even imagine how it would have been if we didn't have you guys, you know, like Anne-Marie. I shudder to think, because I could barely, you know, from going through everything, it's hard, like when you're the mom, even though like you want to be strong, and I tried to be strong. It's hard because the whole situation.
I think it's important that people understand that Tammy is one of thousands of victims, unfortunately, in our system. And this office, you know, I'm so proud of, because we're filled with, we do this job because we have two things in mind: one, protecting victims, and two, protecting the public. And, you know, there's 170 lawyers in this building that would all stand up for Tammy. There's, you know, dozens of investigators. There's victim advocates that have held her hand along the way. There's a crime lab, there's support staff. All of us have the same mission, which is to seek justice and serve justice and do justice. And so I'm blessed to know Tammy, but I also know that there are hundreds of people in this building that would stand up for her at a parole hearing or a courtroom, wherever it is. And so that's where the role of the prosecutor, it doesn't end with sentencing, contrary to what some uneducated people say. The role of the prosecutor doesn't end with sentencing. It ends when the case is final and over, and that ultimately the parole decision, and maybe it gets changed later on, but we're always going to be there, Tammy. We're always going to be there. What concerns me is that who's going to speak for them? Who's going to, I mean, you know, I was fortunate enough to go to law school. I understand the process. I understand what a parole hearing's like. I understand what the parole board is going to look at. And the system is built upon, the criminal justice system is built upon the fact that there's advocates on both sides. Ramel should have an advocate, of course he should, who speaks for him. But so should Tammy and Janae. And without the presence of a prosecutor, you have abandoned that role, and you're essentially saying victims don't matter if you don't show up. So I think it's important. I mean, that's, you know, we're not going to abandon victims in this county. I'll guarantee you that. But it's important that people understand, victims particularly, that they have a right to have a representative present at a parole hearing. And so, and they also need to make sure, Tammy has been very diligent to register with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to be notified of updating things. Because if you don't register, you may not get notified. We are very proactive about things and making sure we find victims, but you know, unfortunately, victims move, they change phone numbers, they change addresses, but it's really, really important that if you want to be informed and to be kept notified about what's happening on that inmate, you have to register so that you can get notified of these decisions that are really, can potentially be life altering for you.